Well, in the wake of the disaster, the government ordered a review of cladding used on all high-rise buildings in the UK, and several buildings here in Sussex were found to have dangerous cladding. Among them, the New England Quarter development in Brighton and the Landmark building in Bexhill. Here's what residents told us about their concerns back in 2021.
I'm not sleeping. I'm awake at 3 o'clock in the morning, wandering the flat, wondering where I can find some money, and I have no way of doing that. It's with you every day. You don't feel safe, you can't see a future, you don't know what's going to happen. I fear bankruptcy, I fear homelessness.
My monthly outgoings just to pay for the waking watch and the huge insurance hikes, I have to find an extra £550 per month on top of everything else. It's just crippling us. And the fear factor is just, I'm living in fear, definitely. Anything can happen. And we now know, from what we understand, like Grenfell, if the outside of the building catches, we're just going to go up. And it's terrifying. I was going to try and sell my flat this year. I can't now. It's worth nothing.
Listening to that is Elaine Stevens, who we just heard from there and has a flat in the Landmark building in Bexhill. Hi, Elaine.
Yes, good morning, Danny.
Good morning. So, obviously, you've had an interest in the Grenfell inquiry because of the cladding that's been around your building. What's your reaction to what we heard, the sort of damning of so many different organisations in what happened at Grenfell?
Well, it's shocking, isn't it? These are people's lives we are talking about, their homes. They want to feel safe in their homes. I mean, it's a national disaster, and it's very slow to remedy as well.
Because in another scenario, that could have been where you live. So what's happened with where you live now, Elaine, in the recent years? Where are you at the moment?
Well, it took a long time to actually get a fire survey report. We didn't have one until November 2020, and that's because there's not enough fire engineers to go round to actually survey all these buildings. But from then, we've actually had to push for funds from the Building Safety Fund to remedy this, because otherwise the costs would have come on to leaseholders, which of course is not right. It's not our fault these buildings have been so poorly built.
Yes, and so that building fund, that was the government fund to replace this. So has the cladding now been changed on your building? Yes,
it started back last year, May 2023. We still have scaffolding up now. We've actually been swaddled in scaffolding for more than 16 months. It's a slow process. We've had to put up with dirt and dust, and I was actually decanted from my flat because it was deemed unlivable. It's just been a terrible ordeal, quite honestly.
I can imagine.
We're about 95% done now, but it's taken a long time.
Right, so it's nearly finished. And while the replacement of the cladding has been borne by the government, you have incurred extra costs yourselves just to live there. Tell us a little bit about that, Elaine.
Well, yes, there's other things that's come out of this. They found our lifts were not up to standard and needed to be firefighting lifts. It's things like the cavity breaks, and also we've got to have, luckily under our warranty, we've had to claim for internal work to be done as well. Also, the building insurance shot up. It was at the beginning $47,000 a year, and it shot up to over $268,000 a year.
So 5 times as much, essentially.
Yes, basically, and we have to find that money.
So this has had a huge impact on your life, I'd imagine. How do you feel now about the future?
Tell the honest truth, I really don't still feel safe. I still question whether the new stuff that they've put up is, building regulators, and everybody has been...
Blimey, you would hope so, with what we've learned. You would hope so, wouldn't you, Elaine?
You do hope so, yes. But, of course, it really hasn't put all our minds at rest, because the anxiety of living in one of these places for all these years, and it's taken 4 years for us to get to this stage.
Elaine, thank you for talking to us. All the best to you. Thanks. Elaine Stevens there in Bexhill. Micheál O'Connell is from the City Point Residents Association in the New England Quarter in Brighton. Micheál, morning to you.
Good morning, Danny.
Hi there, thanks. What situation are you in at the moment?
So, I'd just like to, I don't want to repeat what Elaine has said. I happened to be passing by Grenfell on the day the fire happened. And many of us are living in City Point with children, some of us on the ground floor, some of us higher up. But obviously there was years of anxiety when we failed the cladding remediation tests. What we've done is organise a residents association, and we organised a campaign to force the builders to pay for the cladding remediation. And they've agreed to do that, which we're relieved at. That's taken a lot of the worry away. There's still the question of risks, and fundamental problems, in my opinion, have not been dealt with, which is the profit motive in housing. So now we've got,
Well, you can have profit and you can build safely, can't you? And that's not what happened with the cladding at Grenfell.
Well, what we've got now is estate management companies and housing associations who are, in a sense, almost benefiting from the aftermath of what's happened here, because they're adding more charges. The insurance company, for example, it was the insurance was just mentioned. It turned out that our insurance company is connected closely with the estate management company, which we have no control whatsoever over. So in our case, that's first sport. We're not blaming the people on the ground, but the entity itself. And likewise, Moat Housing, the housing association involved, they seem to be more interested in ways of policing us and ways of making money and passing on costs to ordinary leaseholders, to people renting and so on, than the actual issue. Obviously, residents themselves are worried about safety. It's our highest priority, but we don't want these other profit-hungry companies, which are in a constellation and sometimes in cahoots with the likes of the building companies that have been mentioned in the Grenfell inquiry. They're in the same, they exploit people's need for housing, basically, in order to squeeze as much money as they can from us.
So is your building safe now? Do you feel safe living there?
So we have got Waking Watch, we have got the cladding remediation process happening, and we've got that's in process. It's happening more slowly than we'd hoped. We feel reasonably secure, and we're having to keep an eye on everything to make sure that those costs are not passed on to us, and that, say, the estate management company and the housing association can't sort of financially benefit from what is a terrible story, really.
Yeah. Micheál, thank you for talking to us today. Micheál O'Connell there at the New England Quarter in Brighton. Now, we asked both Rydon and Harley Facades for an interview or statements this morning. We didn't hear back from those two Sussex companies who really got a bad report from the inquiry into Grenfell. We haven't heard back from them, but if we do, we'll put them on the air. In an hour's time, we'll hear from a building safety expert. It's BBC Radio Sussex, and it's 8:21 now.
Danny Pike in the morning.
And joining me now from Eastbourne is Caroline Stretsfield, whose block also had flammable cladding removed. Hi, Caroline.
Hi, Danny.
Hi, thanks for chatting to us today. And when you found out that you had the sort of cladding that could cause a similar disaster to what happened in Grenfell, what was your thoughts about that, and what sort of impact did that have on you?
Well, obviously I worried that if there was a fire, we wouldn't be able to get out on time. I bought one of these ladders to put over the balcony just in case. And also I was worried about the financial impact it would have on us.
And what's happened since then? Has the cladding now been replaced?
Yes, so the management company managed to get the grant funding to replace the cladding, but that was a real struggle. That took quite a few months. And then the work was done, and that took about 18 months, and it finished last year.
And what was it like living in the place while you knew it had the poor cladding on it, and while it was being removed and replaced? What was it like to live there? Because you're on a building site, but also there's that extra worry in the time before they started the work.
It was awful. There was drilling, constant drilling, a lot of internal damage to the flat done by the contractors. They found that there was water not draining properly from the balconies. They had to do something with the fire alarm. And it just seemed to go on and on.
And like Elaine, have you had sort of costs that you've had to bear as well? Because the cladding was paid for, I think, under the government's scheme, but were there additional costs for you as well?
So we were told originally that it could be up to $54,000 for our 2-bedroom flat, which obviously isn't affordable for anybody, and why should we pay for it anyway? But in the end, we had to pay an additional £2,000 to cover the sort of other issues like the updating the fire alarm, etc., which weren't covered by the grant.
And how does
money for people, you know?
Yeah, of course it is. And how does it feel living there now?
It feels okay. I like living here. Mm-hmm. You know, we don't want to move. We've only actually lived here for 5 years, so you know, came in, bought the flat, and then suddenly found out that all this work has got to be done.
Wow.
But yeah, we like it here now.
Does it feel now that you can start enjoying living there because you've got that reassurance that the building is safe and actually you can enjoy your time there?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I do feel safe now.
That's good to hear. Thanks, Caroline. Thanks for chatting to us. All the best to you.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks a lot. Caroline Stretsfield there in Eastbourne. Building expert Simon Pitchers, who's a chartered structural engineer and director of Art Bowen Limited, joins us now. Hi, Simon.
Hi, Danny.
Well, what have you made of this whole thing and what came out of the Grenfell inquiry about all the wrongdoing that was done and you know, Arconia, who made the cladding, knowing that it wasn't safe, but carried on trading this particular product? What do you make of all this?
It's a very, very hard-hitting Phase 2 report, and it names names and it allocates blame as well. So it's very good to kind of see that eventually emerge. What it does show us is that there's a conflict quite often between commercial interests and the sort of regularity function or the regulatory function of bodies like building control, National House Building Council, Building Research Establishment, and all of them were compromised by the fact that they had commercial interests in the tests that they were carrying out. So that was quite a shock to me as well. But also the level of deception, really, that has occurred with some of the manufacturers, that was a real eye-opener.
Do you think there's, the criminal investigation will continue, and is there a realistic chance of prosecution, would you think?
Well, I would have thought so. I mean, the report, this Phase 2 report, is really damning. So although the criminal prosecution doesn't rely on that public inquiry report, I would have thought they're going to draw similar conclusions at the end of the day. But we've got to remember, this is the sort of third of 3 major documents that have been produced on the problem. The first one was produced by Dame Judith Hackett. That was back in 2018, and a lot of stuff started to change as a result of that. So you've got the new Building Safety Act, you've got a new building safety regulator, local authority building control, I've noticed, has changed as well. It's tightened quite a bit. And then we got Phase 1 of Sir Martin Moore-Bick's report, which came in 2019. And that, again, that gave us the mechanism as to how exactly the fire had spread in Grenfell. And that was very useful to understand the mechanisms and the sort of technical side. And this final Phase 2 report sort of covers off all of the allocation of blame. So a lot of things have happened in the industry over the past 7 years.
And can you give us some reassurance whether business practices have changed and whether companies would still be as dishonest as some of them have been in the future? I suppose you can't guarantee that, but are the safeguards in place if they were to be?
Well, the safeguards are going to take, I reckon it's going to take a generation, really, to change the industry. These things don't happen overnight, but things are definitely improving. And I think people are taking their jobs a lot more seriously. And this merry-go-round of buck passing, I think that's beginning to be curtailed now. So people are taking responsibility for what they do, which is one of the key things at the heart of this disaster. And also we're seeing competence being developed and tested more. So there's not going to be people who really are new to the design of, for example, high-rise buildings being involved in the design of high-rise buildings anymore. That's all going to change. So things are definitely changing for the better. But the thing is, Danny, these things take a long, long time. You've got a whole industry that's doing the wrong thing, and you've got to wait really for probably 20, 30 years before the whole thing actually sorts itself out, I would guess.
Wow, that's quite something that's quite a prospect to live with for a couple of decades.
It is, yeah. And I mean, there are certain things that can be done now to kind of accelerate that, and people are doing that. But when you've got a sort of a whole industry that isn't quite functioning correctly, it takes a long time. So many people involved for the new methods of thinking about things, the new culture, if you like, to permeate through the whole of the workforce, that, it's got to take time, I'm afraid.
And if we're embarking on a big house building program in the next few years to meet the demands, will that be an issue for people building those houses? And no doubt there'll be flats involved and high rises in that too.
It will, yeah. And there are ways you can kind of short circuit this. So what I would really like to see is more scrutiny between those who are designing the buildings and those who are building the buildings. At the moment, it's getting better, but there's not that much of sort of people looking at what's being built and saying, well, actually, that's not quite right. That's not how the design was supposed to be. You can go up to somebody on site sometimes these days and say, look, you're not putting that, for example, wall tie in correctly. And the person will turn around to you and say, look, mate, I've been doing that for 30 years. Nobody's ever told me not that it's wrong. And so I'm going to carry on doing it. So we've got to kind of change that attitude. And the way to do that is to try and get more designers out on site. And to do that, you have to pay them. So you have to pay a bit more for scrutiny. So any of your listeners, if you're involved in building projects, I would say really try and get the people, the architects, the designers, the engineers, pay them a bit extra, get them out on site to keep an eye on what's going on. And I think you'll save money in the long term. That's
an interesting point. Thanks for leaving us with that today, Simon. Thanks for your time.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Cheers. All the best. Thanks. Simon Pitchers there from Arc Bowen Limited with us on BBC Radio Sussex. And your reaction to what you heard from that final report into Grenfell yesterday, anything that particularly caught your ear there, 0800 232 1045 is our number. And also the remedial work that's been taking place on flats in Sussex as a result of what happened at Grenfell, and the length of time that's taken, and also the additional cost to people living in those flats, even if the repairs were taking place with the government's grant, the funds for that internally in the building. A lot of people have still been out of pocket because of that.